Most people have no idea what's happening behind the scenes, but the truth is this: several everyday foods you rely on are quietly disappearing, and some will be completely gone before 2026 even begins. Grocery stores won't announce it, and the news won't warn you, but I will. Because once you see which food hits the danger zone next, number 3 is going to shock you. Number 1, rice. When you think about survival foods, some items feel optional, some feel helpful. And then there's rice, one of the few foods on the planet that becomes absolutely non-negotiable in any real crisis. And if you've been paying attention, you already know why this staple needs to be at the very top of your list this week, not next month, not sometime soon. But now, before 2026 forces millions of people to fight over the last affordable bags left on the shelves. Rice is the backbone of global nutrition. More than half the world relies on it as their primary calorie source, and that alone should tell you something. When times get hard, people don't reach for luxuries. They reach for survival, calories-dense, cheap, stable foods that can stretch meals for weeks. Rice does exactly that, and that is why it becomes one of the first foods to spike in price and disappear when the economy tightens. We saw it in 2008, we saw it in 2020, and we re-seen the early signs again. Export limits, rising freight costs, unpredictable weather patterns. And countries quietly restricting shipments to protect their own populations. But here's the part nobody is talking about. Rice inflation is different from other food inflation, because once the price jumps, it almost never returns to normal. It sticks. That means every delay costs you money and reduces your ability to build a proper stockpile. And if you've noticed how 5 kilograms and 10 kilograms bags are shrinking while prices climb, that's not an accident. That's the early stage of supply stress. Manufacturers shrink quantities when they know shortages or increased demand are coming. Now imagine what happens when millions of families suddenly realize food security isn't guaranteed. They panic by the cheapest calories available. And what's the first thing they grab? Rice. It happened in Southeast Asia earlier this year. It happened in Europe during the energy crisis. And it will happen again, especially as 2026 approaches and more nations tighten exports to protect domestic supply. When one country stops shipping rice, 2 more follow, and suddenly the entire global flow breaks down within weeks. This chain reaction doesn't happen gradually. It happens almost overnight. Rice is also essential because of its unmatched shelf life. Stored correctly or tight, in mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, it can last up to 25 to 30 years. There are almost no other foods that give you that kind of security for such a small investment. A single $20, $30 bulk purchase can secure hundreds of emergency meals. And during an economic collapse, that kind of stability isn't just convenience, life-changing. You're not relying on unstable markets. You're not at the mercy of sudden shortages. You're creating a buffer between your family and chaos. But another reason rice becomes so valuable during hard times. It multiplies the effectiveness of everything else you store. Beans, lentils, canned meats, vegetables, soups, everything becomes more filling, more stretchable, and more satisfying when paired with rice. If protein becomes scarce or expensive, rice helps keep meals balanced and calories consistent. If you need to feed multiple family members on a tight budget, rice helps you stretch meals without sacrificing energy. In a crisis, value isn't measured in taste, it's measured in how far your food takes you. And here's what makes this even more urgent. Floods and droughts across major producing regions have already damaged upcoming harvests. Energy prices are raising transportation costs. Fertilizer shortages are putting pressure on yields. All of this compounds into one outcome: rice is about to get more expensive and harder to find. The people who wait will pay double. The people who hesitate will find empty shelves. The people who prepare now will be the only ones with real security. So if you do nothing else this week, start with rice. Buy extra bags. Look for bulk discounts. Store them properly. Build your baseline calories while prices are still manageable. Because once panic buying starts, it's too late. You're no longer preparing, you're competing. You're fighting crowds instead of quietly building stability today. Let this be your first step, not your last. Stockpiling rice is more than just a purchase it. A signal that you are taking your future seriously, that you refuse to be caught unprepared when the next crisis hits. In the next chapter, we'll Well, look at the one food group that becomes even more valuable than rice when the economy collapses: protein. And why canned meats are already showing early signs of shortage. Number 2. Canned protein. When an economic crisis hits, protein is always the first thing to become unaffordable for ordinary families. You might still find snacks, cereal, or cheap carbs on the shelves, but walk over to the meat section during a downturn, and you'll see nothing but rising prices, empty coolers, and families staring at price tags they can no longer justify. That's why canned protein, tuna, chicken, sardines, Spam, canned beef, even shelf-stable beans with meat becomes one of the smartest and most life-saving purchases you can make right now, while it's still within reach. Protein isn't just another nutrient. It's what keeps your muscles strong, your immune system functioning, and your body able to handle stress. During crisis periods, when people are tired, anxious, exhausted, and eating fewer calories, protein becomes even more important. It stabilizes blood sugar, increases satiety, and prevents the weakness and fatigue that come with poor diets. And yet, it's also the first food group to vanish when supply chains get shaky. Look back at any major disaster or recession, and the pattern is unmistakable. In 2020, fresh meats were rationed in multiple countries. During past financial crises, grocery stores doubled the price of chicken and beef overnight. When feed prices rose earlier this year, farmers nationwide warned that eggs, poultry, and beef would never return to normal prices. And they were right, those costs are still rising today. Now imagine what happens when 2026 brings another wave of economic pressure. Shipping delays, fuel spikes, or even a breakdown in international livestock feed supply. If you think meat is expensive now, wait until the next shock hits. This is exactly why canned meats become priceless during uncertainty. They give you stable, long-lasting protein without requiring refrigeration, expensive fuel, or constant electricity. A single can of chicken lasts years. A few cans of tuna provide more protein than several pounds of fresh fish for a fraction of the cost. Canned beef, chili, or stew can become full meals when everything else runs low. And the best part? They remain edible and nutritious far beyond their printed dates, as long as the can stays intact. But it's not just about nutrition, it's about psychological security. When grocery stores look wiped out, when cold storage sections are bare, when families have no idea what they'll eat tomorrow, having a shelf of canned meat is like holding gold. It gives you confidence, strength, and stability in a world that suddenly feels unstable. And when inflation forces families to cut back, the ones with stockpiles won't be forced to choose between feeding their children and paying bills. What makes this even more urgent is the quiet shortage building behind the scenes. Rising diesel prices make transporting livestock feed more expensive. Drought is cutting grain production, which directly impacts chicken and cattle industries. Fisheries worldwide are struggling, pushing tuna and sardine prices higher year after year. And geopolitical tensions are disrupting global seafood distribution. These are the early tremors before the real shockwave arrives, and when it does, canned protein will be among the first foods to disappear entirely. Most people don't understand how fragile the meat supply chain is. Chickens don't appear overnight. Cows take years to raise. Fish populations collapse when overharvested. So when instability hits, farmers and producers have no quick way to recover. Canned goods, on the other hand, are stored from previous stable years, which means availability drops sharply the moment demand rises. Once panic buying begins, those shelves empty faster than any other aisle. Canned meats also give you a massive advantage in meal building. Combine them with rice, pasta, beans, or vegetables, and suddenly you have complete meals that can stretch for days. You don't need a fridge, you don't need a freezer. Can opener and a pan are enough. In a power outage, canned tuna mixed with shelf-stable mayo becomes a protein-packed meal in minutes. Canned chicken can be added to soups or stews. Canned beef can turn plain rice into something hearty and satisfying. When times are tough, versatility is survival. So if you haven't already started building your canned protein supply, this week is the time to do it. Not next month when prices spike again. Not after the next news headline warns about shortages. By then, you'll be fighting crowds for scraps. Buy multiple types: fish, poultry, beef, because each offers nutritional variety and different uses. Start with what your family already likes. Look for sales and bulk discounts. Aim for at least 2 to 3 months of protein security, more if your budget allows. Because once the system falters, protein won't just be expensive, it will be inaccessible. And those who fail to prepare will be forced into unhealthy, carb-heavy diets that weaken the body right when resilience matters most. But you won't be one of them. You're preparing today so you don't have to panic tomorrow. Now that we've secured your protein foundation, it's time to move to the next essential item, one that becomes the backbone of homemade meals when store shelves thin: flour and baking essentials, the building blocks of survival cooking. Number 3. Flour and baking essentials. If there is one category of food that quietly decides whether a family eats well during a crisis or barely scrapes by, it's flour and the core baking essentials that go with yeast, sugar, salt, baking powder, and oil. These are the ingredients that transform a few cheap staples into complete meals. They turn rice and beans into something filling, comforting, and familiar. They give you the power to bake bread, tortillas, biscuits, pancakes, and emergency food substitutes when shelves run empty. And as we move closer to 2026, these simple ingredients are becoming far more valuable than most people realize. Right now, the global wheat supply chain is one of the most fragile systems in the entire food market. Major wheat-producing regions have been hit with extreme weather, historic droughts, unexpected floods, and temperature swings that kill crops before they can mature. Fertilizer costs have surged due to geopolitical tensions, and the farmers paying those higher costs are producing less, not more. Diesel prices have increased the cost of running tractors, irrigation systems, and transport trucks. When the core ingredient becomes unstable, everything downstream becomes unstable too. This is why flour is quietly becoming one of the most important foods to secure. It's not glamorous, and it doesn't sit in the trendy aisles of grocery stores. But it becomes priceless the moment bread prices spike or bakeries shut down because they can't afford the raw materials. We've seen this play out in multiple countries already: flour rationing, bread riots, government subsidies that still fail to keep up with demand. And if this is happening during what many economists still call a partial instability, imagine what the picture will look like if 2026 brings a deeper economic shock. Flour isn't just a baking ingredient, it's a survival multiplier. A few cups of flour can create flatbreads that stretch a pot of beans for an entire family. It can thicken soups, form dumplings, make tortillas, or become quick biscuits when you barely have anything left in the pantry. It's one of the few foods that lets you turn simple ingredients into complete meals that feel warm, substantial, and comforting during stressful times. But flour alone isn't enough. To unlock its full power, you need the essentials that millions of people overlook: yeast, sugar, salt, and baking powder. These items are cheap now, but they vanish quickly during emergencies because households suddenly realize they can't bake without them. Think back to the early pandemic. Yeast disappeared overnight. Flour shelves were empty for weeks. People who had never baked in their lives suddenly fought over the last bag because they realized the store-bought bread they relied on could no longer be counted on. Sugar and salt aren't just flavor enhancers. They are preservation tools. Salt preserves meats, ferments vegetables, and extends the life of almost anything you store. Sugar stabilizes baking, boosts calories. It acts as a morale booster, something people underestimate until they are living through a crisis. And baking powder gives you the ability to create quick breads without yeast, which becomes critical when time, fuel, or energy is limited. Now, here's the part most people overlook. These items have incredible shelf life. Salt lasts forever. Sugar lasts decades if stored properly. Baking powder and yeast remain viable for years when sealed. Flour stored in mylar bags with oxygen absorbers can last far longer than the expiration date printed on the package. In other words, you're not just buying ingredients, you're buying time, stability, and options. When you control the building blocks of food, you control your household's resilience. And yet, despite how inexpensive these items are today, they are among the most sensitive to supply chain shocks. A single drought in a major wheat region can raise global flour prices. A disruption in fertilizer production can slash wheat yields. A spike in energy prices can double the cost of milling and transport. When inflation hits, bread and baking products are often the first items that families notice jumping in price. And when people panic buy, these aisles empty out much faster than expected. This is why you need to take action before the storm hits. Buy extra flour now. Secure multiple types: white, whole wheat, and even alternative flours if your family has specific dietary needs. Pick up large bags of sugar and salt. Get several jars of yeast and rotate them. Build a small stock of baking powder, baking soda, and even shelf-stable shortening or oils to give yourself maximum flexibility. These are extremely affordable today, but they may become impossible to find during the next major disruption. Because once shelves go empty, people won't be thinking about variety. They'll be thinking about survival. They'll grab whatever they can, and the basic baking items will vanish first. But you won't be scrambling. You'll already be prepared, already stocked, already ahead of the panic curve. And now that you've secured the ingredients for homemade survival food, it's time to look at the item that has saved more lives in food crises than almost any other. Beans and lentils, the protein-rich staples that stretch meals and keep families nourished when everything else runs short. Number 4. Dry beans and lentils when you study any period of economic collapse, famine, or long-term crisis. One pattern appears every single time. The families who make it through are the ones who have access to beans, lentils, and other shelf-stable legumes. These foods aren't just cheap fillers, they're powerful sources of protein, fiber, minerals, and slow-burning energy that keep you full when everything else becomes scarce. And as we move closer to 2026, the warning signs around global crop yields and supply chains make it clear. Beans and lentils will become some of the hardest foods to find once shortages accelerate. Right now, most people don't realize how delicate the legume supply system actually is. Farmers are dealing with unpredictable weather patterns that destroy crops without warning, months of drought followed by sudden floods. Regions that once produced stable yields of lentils or chickpeas are seeing 20 to 40% reductions. Add to that the rising cost of fertilizer, diesel, irrigation, and transportation. And you have a system that's holding together by threads. Beans look stable on the surface because they're cheap today. But cheap doesn't mean safe fit, means vulnerable to shocks. Shocks are exactly what we're walking into. Global demand for beans has been climbing because more families around the world are turning to cheap protein sources as meat becomes unaffordable. When inflation squeezes the middle class, people stop buying steaks and switch to plant proteins. When shipping costs rise, stores cut back on imported lentils. When drought destroys soybean harvests, prices ripple across every other type of bean. These stresses stack on top of each other until one day you go to the store and see entire shelves wiped clean. Just like we saw during the early pandemic, just like we saw during grain shortages, just like we'll see again if we hit another economic downturn. But here, that's the real reason beans and lentils are essential. They turn survival food into real meals. They stretch rice, they stretch vegetables, they stretch canned meats. A single pot of beans can feed a family for days, especially when paired with flour-based breads or rice. When money runs tight, beans give you the ability to create meals that are filling, balanced, and satisfying, even when the world outside feels unstable. They are one of the rare foods that offer both high protein and high fiber without requiring refrigeration or complicated cooking methods. And if you're storing fuel or dealing with power outages, lentils become even more valuable. They cook quickly using far less energy than dried beans. Another advantage most people overlook is shelf life. Properly stored beans can last 10 to 30 years. Lentils can last decades when sealed in mylar with oxygen absorbers. This is the kind of stability you need when you're preparing for the unknown. Food that lasts long enough to bridge you through a crisis, a recession, a job loss, or a supply chain collapse is priceless, and beans are one of the most reliable long-term foods you can store. Now think about what happens during shortages. Panic buying kicks in, and the exact foods people once ignored suddenly disappear. Beans are always among the first to go because people finally realize what you already know: they re-cheap. Versatile, filling, and essential. But by then it's too late. You're not preparing, you're competing. Competing in panic mode is always expensive, chaotic, and stressful. This is why you must take action while shelves are still full. Build a supply of lentils, red, green, brown, black beans, kidney beans, chickpeas, pinto beans, anything your family enjoys. Buying a wide variety ensures you have flexibility in meals and nutrition. Red lentils cook fast for emergency situations. Chickpeas work for stews, spreads, and baked dishes. Black beans pair with rice for protein-rich meals. Pinto beans stretch chili and soups. You're not just buying food, you're buying adaptability. Let's talk about morale for a moment. In a crisis, food isn't just fuel. It's comfort, stability, and a sense of normalcy. A simple pot of beans, simmering on the stove, can make a struggling household feel grounded again. It reminds you that you're still in control, that you can still provide, that you still have something solid to lean on. That psychological strength matters more than most people understand. So this week, while prices are still reasonable and availability hasn't yet collapsed, start building your bean and lentil reserves. Buy in bulk if you can. Use airtight containers or Mylar bags for long-term storage. If you can afford it, aim for at least a 3-month supply. Because once the cracks in the system widen, it 1TB the luxury foods disappearing, first at LLB the essentials that everyone suddenly realizes they need. And now that you've secured your foundation of calories and protein, it's time to focus on one of the most critical and most overlooked survival foods of all, cooking oils and fats. The high-calorie lifeline that vanishes faster than almost anything else when a crisis hits. Number 5, cooking oil and fats. When people think about survival food, they usually focus on rice, beans, canned goods, and flour. But they overlook one of the most critical items for long-term survival: cooking oil and fats. These are the calories that keep your body functioning when food becomes scarce. They're the ingredient that transforms raw staples into real meals. And they are always among the first items to disappear during food shortages. As we approach 2026, the global oil and fat supply chain is showing cracks that should alarm anyone paying attention. Calories are survival. When you're in a crisis, when stress is high, meals are smaller, and energy demands increase, your body needs fats more than ever. Fat is the densest form of energy we have. 1 tablespoon of oil provides more calories than an entire slice of bread. When you're trying to stretch limited food into multiple meals, those calories become life-saving. They help your body absorb vitamins, regulate hormones, and maintain strength. Yet fats are also the least talked about part of any prepper's pantry. Why? Because they don't seem important till they vanish. During every major crisis, wartime, recessions, shipping disruptions, droughts, the price of cooking oils skyrockets long before people even realize what's happening. Sunflower oil shortages in Europe, soybean crop failures in South America, palm oil export bans in Asia. These events caused panic buying and left shelves empty worldwide. And those were just early warning shots. Rising fertilizer prices, transportation costs, and crop disease are now pushing oil and fat prices higher every month. When supply chains break, oil doesn't trickle out. Slowly it disappears overnight. And unlike rice or beans, which can last decades, cooking oils have a limited shelf life. That makes them even more vulnerable to shortages because manufacturers and stores don't hold huge reserves. They rely on constant production and constant shipping. So when one part of that system breaks, the entire supply collapses almost immediately. That's why during crises, oil becomes one of the hardest foods to find at any price. And it's why you need to stock up now while stores are quietly struggling to keep up with rising demand. Cooking oil isn't just for frying or baking, it's the foundation of almost every meal. Without it, your beans stick to the pot, your rice is bland and unsatisfying. Your homemade bread lacks richness, and your calorie intake drops dangerously low. Oil makes soups heartier, turns vegetables into full meals, and stretches ingredients further than you ever thought possible. In survival mode, taste matters more than people realize. Little oil can turn a plain bowl of rice and beans into something warm, it's comforting, and filling, something that lifts morale when everything else feels heavy. But here's what most people don't know. Fat deficiency is a real threat during long-term emergencies. If you rely only on carbs and protein, your energy levels crash. You become cold, irritable, unfocused, and weak. Your immune system suffers. Your body becomes less capable of handling physical and emotional stress. And this ISNT, hypothetical historical famines, and wartime diaries document widespread fatigue and weakness, caused not just by lack of food, but by lack of fats. Survivors learned that a few teaspoons of oil each day could restore energy and strength faster than anything else. This is why you should treat oils and fats not as an optional extra, but as a core survival food. Stock up on the oils your family uses regularly. Olive oil, canola, sunflower, peanut oil. Add longer-lasting fats like ghee, coconut oil, shortening, or lard. These stay stable far longer than most people realize, especially when stored in cool, dark places. And because oils rotate easily, you use them in daily cooking, you can maintain a steady, fresh supply without waste. The other reason to act now is simple. Global demand for edible oils is exploding, while crop yields are falling. More processed foods, more restaurants, more packaged meals all require huge amounts of oil. Meanwhile, drought and disease are cutting production in key regions. This creates the perfect storm: high demand, low supply, and rising prices. By 2026, oils may not just be more expensive, they may be rationed, restricted, or unavailable entirely in some places. Imagine trying to cook all the food you've stored without oil. Beans and rice will still fill your stomach, but your body will run on empty. Meals won't stretch as far. Everything will taste repetitive, bland, and exhausting. That's not how you maintain morale during hard times. That's not how you keep yourself or your family strong when stress levels are high. A stockpile of oil is more than a cooking ingredient's energy, flavor, strength, and psychological comfort. So make this week the week you secure your fat supply. Buy multiple bottles, add long-lasting alternatives, rotate your stock. Don't wait for the next headline warning of shortage. By then, prices will spike and shelves will empty just like they did before. The people who prepare now will be the ones who stay stable while everyone else scrambles. And now that you've built a foundation of calories, protein, baking essentials, beans, and fats, you're ready for the final step of this journey. In the conclusion, I'll bring everything together and show you why preparing today, fear it, as freedom, control, and protection against the uncertainty ahead. At this point, you're no longer just watching a video. You've taken the first step toward protecting your future. Because when 2026 brings the next wave of economic pressure, the people who prepared will stay calm while everyone else panics. Remember, hope is not a strategy. Action is. Every bag of rice, every can of protein, every pound of flour or beans, every bottle of oil you buy today is one less crisis you'll face tomorrow. Start small, start now, and build the security your family deserves while you still can.